Alex, thank you for reading that letter. You've reminded us again that something intimately personal is also universal. And for those who need any other reminder of that, one has to think how much that resonates with the current APC TV series, if you're watching it, Stateless, which is about that experience that we Australians have allowed to be inflicted on people in our own country based on a real story that took place over 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We've been aware of that sort of treatment on the behalf of governments, acting on behalf of all of us, of course, for that many years. Alex, so in one way I'm saying thank you for doing this, because it's not just about one group of people. It's about a problem that is becoming a global problem. This week it's coronavirus. The wave will pass in a couple of months, but people are saying the refugee crisis will grow, particularly with the impact of climate change. So do you see this as part of a wider mission for you? Perhaps that's too strong a word. I could even go stronger, almost a calling for you.
Wow, a calling. I cannot say that I thought about it in that way. However, I have learned to trust there's something that takes me to certain places and to certain situations. So, I don't want to sound like... basically, what I want to say is that I don't think it's a coincidence when something happens to me. If for some reason I find myself on a street corner and I see something or witness something or learn something, then I was meant to learn about that. And in this case, I accept the responsibility of that comes along with meeting certain people in certain situations. In the obligation that I do feel in passing on their story. One thing that I have learned through photography is that everyone has a story, and people want to be heard. They want a chance to tell that story. There might be others that think photography could be a kind of like a form of aggression too. When you put the camera on someone's face, a kind of violation of their privacy, or something like that. And I can understand certain situations where that might be the case. But in my experience, or at least in the kind of work that I have engaged, I have come to realize that people, they want to be heard, and if you give them the chance, they tell you their truth. They tell you their story, and if they do, then I feel like then it's my responsibility also to pass along that story, not to lock it up in a box in my closet somewhere.
Your images allow people to speak. It's the image that conveys the voice.
I hope so.
Is that a challenge that you as a photographer face with every image you take, particularly when it's about subjects like this? You say, how do I allow this person to speak through my lens?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that happens with every single image at every single moment, and the fear of failing to do that is always there. It's always there. And also, the kind of conflict or fight between, on the one hand, thinking as an artist in creating an image that is visually impactful or interesting, and not necessarily letting those aesthetic, more formal ideas or concerns overtake the content of the message of the subject in front of you. That's something that I tend to kind of struggle to a certain point. I still want to make an interesting visual image, but that image ultimately is going to have very little value to me if the content is not there, if the message is not there. At the same time, an image that have a very strong message or content, but it still is not visually interesting, might fail in attracting the viewer's attention and holding the person in front of it long enough to get the message across. Mm-hmm. So that's something always in my head, trying to find the balance between the form and the message itself.
Yeah, it's the tension between the formal craft that you have and the emotional spontaneity of the moment. And those two can run in conflict, I guess, sometimes.
Yes, they do. I have learned that every time that I try to maybe pre-conceptualize the process, maybe kind of imagine what the situation is going to be like and maybe prepare myself to create an image that I think might work before I'm in the situation. At least for me, it never works. It fails. So I have learned also to trust my own reaction to that moment. So that's why
trust your instincts.
Yeah, completely. That's why I said at the beginning that it has served me better to not to talk too much and to listen, right, and to be there. Not always an image happens quickly in fractions of a second. In a fraction of a second, the image is kind of captured and recorded. But the process of getting to that moment, for me, it takes longer. For me, it takes getting to know. In the case of people, getting to know them better, spending some time with them.
Well, let's talk a little for a moment about what shaped those instincts. Yes, you can learn the formal craft of photography, but what shapes the instincts for you? And you mentioned your encounter with Hizmet has had some influence on that. It helped shape your worldview. And that comes through the sort of commitments you make as a photographer. What are the key elements of that?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not sure if I ever stopped to think about, the kind of things. I mean, the experiences that we go through, all of us as individuals, they are really the elements that shape who we are and how we react further. It's always good to, maybe at times stop, slow down, reflect on who we are at the moment and how we got there. I think, growing up, I cannot say that I always thought that I was going to be a photographer. Photography for me was a surprise that came very late. But I remember growing up looking at our family albums. My mother was really good at making sure that each one of us at home had an album showing pictures from when we were babies and growing up, right? So looking through those books again and again and again and again, I think helped shape and, if not shape, maintain my memories growing up. So I understand the value and the importance of photographs, if for anything, just for that. The opportunity that you get to look at a moment that was a present, and now it has been extended indefinitely for you to be able to contemplate it. and then what that does to you. Similarly, if I can connect that, I'm experimenting here, doing that for the first time here with you. So if I can connect that then with my experience of learning about the Hizmet movement, one thing that I have noticed is this incredible patience and actions of like self-reflection that I have encountered among people within Hizmet. Self-reflections and certain quietness, which I think is very important because it's part of what has given the movement the ability to survive a very difficult moments like this one. One thing that to me was amazing, meeting all these families and all these people in Greece, was to see how despite all the trauma and all the difficulties and all the hardships that they have gone through, they were full of hope. There was, of course, a big trauma, but at the same time, I don't remember. I ultimately always remember is someone smiling, and someone actually not worry maybe about that moment, but not worry about the future, not worry about tomorrow, right? Certain certainty that comes with their trust and their belief in what they are doing and who they are as people, that assures them that things are going to be fine.
And that's affected the way you approach life?
I think so, completely. I mean,
Yeah.
I found some resonance with these ideas and with these things that I have seen in Hizmet, with things that I've noticed at some moment or another, growing up in experiences through people in my life, like the idea of a teacher. Maybe the reason why I teach today is because throughout my life I had a handful. I was lucky, actually, probably more than a handful of amazing teachers. People that they didn't teach me only mathematics and algebra and social science and geography. They taught me life. So the word teacher to me means not someone that teaches you a subject matter, but that teaches you how to live, right? I thought that at some point, maybe I have to pay it forward, like the movie, right? And I never thought that was going to be a vocation. Maybe later, when I'm old or older, and I feel like I actually have something to pass along, then I would do that. Some people thought that that had to happen a lot sooner. Somehow I found myself there. But that idea is something that I, again, encounter in Hizmet. The schools that I have visited, for example, and the teachers that I have met, they teach by example. The idea of being a role model to their students, to these children, is more important than anything.
We have a few moments in which we can open up some questions for the audience. You might have some particular questions about the experience that Alex had on that critical border. You may also have some wider questions as well. But just before your questions, I've got one other. We've got some aspiring photographers and cinematographers at the back of the room there. What's the tip you give to people who say, look, I think I've got a talent for visual storytelling? You're a teacher. You teach young people about this. What's the key message that you try and get across to your first-year students and about the visual arts and the challenges that they should be prepared to meet?
I remember when I went for, not my interview, but it was more of a informal meeting with the dean at the university where I teach now, just before he signed up on my on my appointment. Scary, right? Nice guy, but at the same time, you know, quite a presence. And he asked me, "Do you think that anyone can be an artist?" Right? And I immediately thought that that was a trick question. Because yes, of course, like, you know, many people think it's like, well, you have to, you know, you have to have talent. You have to, you know, it's a gift. You have to be born with it or something. And people might think about that, about, you know, other fields just the same. And I responded maybe a little too quick. I said, yes. You know, anyone can be an artist. I don't know if I should have responded that, but I'm gonna stick by those words. And the reason why I responded that way was because of one of those teachers that I mentioned before. One of those that I had as a young, very young student. I remember in one class, probably like around the 6th grade or so, talking about. I mean, at the end of the day, last class, open conversation in classroom. Someone asked about not being sure what they wanted to do when they grow up, right? And he said, you can do anything you want. Just remember, you know, to be a genius, you don't need 100% IQ, 100% of intelligence. You can be a genius with 1% of intelligence as long as you put 99% of the work, right? So, you know, simple words, probably joking around, but they stuck on a young mind. And that opened up all the possibilities, right? And, you know, there were no limits to, like, you know, what I wanted to do, or like what, you know, what one can approach them if you believe those worlds. And, you know, we all thought, you know, students there, we all thought that we had a little bit more than 1% of intelligence. So maybe we didn't have to work, you know, so hard to, like, accomplish something. So similarly, when I was asked, can everyone be an artist? I think in a similar way, yes. I mean, you know, ultimately in art, I think art a long time ago stopped being about just making things that are beautiful. Beauty is an element and a very important one. But I think it has more to do with, you know, what you feel and what you want to say and how you want to express that. To like young photographers, like in class, like one thing that I tell them is to, you know, if they are sitting there in that class, first is already because they have some really good talent, right? When they're looking through the viewfinder, when they're looking through that camera, you know, pay attention to the little details because you already got the main idea focused on, right? Look at your corners, look at the size of the frame, and think about what you're leaving out or what you're including in, because those little details is what is going to make that image. In other words, slow down, you know, breathe, you know, and pay attention. You know, pay attention, and pay attention sometimes means listen.
Good advice for the whole of life, really. We've got time for some questions from you, and as I said, you might want to ask particular questions about the experience of taking photographs of that dreadful situation on the edge of the Turkish-Greek border.